So there's something in between this, in between accelerators like YC and venture studio models like Atomic. And it's this part-time co-founder or silent co-founder kind of model. And I have many of my friends who are exploring this, who have done this in the past. I know, Naval, that you've done this in the past. And essentially, for those that aren't aware, it's essentially usually someone very experienced, well-connected, comes up with an idea or partners with another founder and helps to get off the ground. They help with recruiting, they help with go-to-market, they help with product, they help with whatever their core competency is. And they, of course, get a stake in that. But it's not their full-time thing. They're not a full-time founder. And I'm very curious to hear, Naval, your take on this model. Maybe it's super bespoke. Maybe there is no way to say it's a good or bad idea because it's really dependent on the co-founder and the person who's starting the company and the team they recruit. But this feels in some ways like an ideal model where very credible, high quality co-founders would want to join a very high quality, credible co-founder, but without, giving up most of the company.
It is highly situationally dependent. You could argue that that is to some small extent what happened with Uber, where it was more Garrett Camp's startup, and then Travis joined or co-founded immediately thereafter, slightly more junior, but then eventually ended up taking it over. So that's one success story. But at least in my personal experience, these tend not to work that well because the person who's kind of helped start it is just still not there enough. It takes the full-time dedication of a motivated and driven founder to make things successful. So the equity stakes have to balance just right, or the company has to take off or inflect early enough that it's not damaged by having a part-time founder who owns a lot of equity but just isn't that involved. But there are exceptions to the rule. So I think it boils down to what the equity distribution is. And I don't think that the part-time founder, even the more senior one, can have as much or more equity than the one who's actually putting in all their blood, sweat, and tears and is going to see it all the way through. However, it's very hard to attribute success or failure to one setup or another. A lot of it depends on how quickly the network effect kicks in. If the network effect in a strong business kicks in very early, it'll forgive almost any founder configuration. However, most businesses have to death march through the desert for years, maybe even decades, before they get to some kind of product market fit. And that requires grit and a founder who's going to persevere and not give up. And that's very difficult to do when you have a part-time co-founder who checks out or steps back early. So the details really matter. And unfortunately, it's hard to make broad generalizations in these cases. It's easier to make broad generalizations in the incubator case because they have standardized models. So one incubator will say, hey, we co-found the company with you, but we take 40%, we give you $2 million. And that's a standard model they run over and over. And you can look at that model and say yes or no. But on the part-time experienced co-founder versus the full-time inexperienced co-founder model, it depends. What's part-time mean? What are their equity splits, et cetera, et cetera?
100%. Yeah, the part-time co-founder should really get a small portion of equity in the long run compared to the full-time founder. And maybe that gets distributed through new grants over time after 5-10 years. Might look very different. And the one thing about that, though, that is very different than a studio model, of course, is that in studios, it's a team. You're splitting that equity stake among a bunch of people. And in this case, it's one person. And so that one person can actually earn quite a bit of money if it works out for even just a relatively small portion of the company. 5% of Uber, I'd take that.